Hi everyone, my name is Ricardo Ruiz. My first collection of poetry, We Had Our Reasons, won the Washington State Book Award and reached #1 on the Amazon Hispanic American Poetry charts. I am the child of Mexican immigrants. My parents migrated from Mexico to work in agriculture in Eastern Washington. They never spoke about why they came or the choices that they made. Growing up, my parents worked to provide, and I never went without my needs not being met. But with that, I didn't always have their time. And because of that, I started to find my own way and didn't always make the best decisions. I didn't graduate high school. I found myself getting into a lot of trouble, and eventually to leave the area, I joined the military. After 7.5 years in service, I left the military and came home. I wanted to be an immigration attorney to help serve my community. In that time though, the trauma from combat was affecting me. I didn't have resources or help. I wasn't connected to the VA or therapy. And a professor offered me poetry to deal with the trauma going on in my life. And I started writing, and that is where I found my purpose. English is not my first language. Spanish is. There's a stark memory I have from being in elementary school, and while my other classmates are learning the rules of grammar, I was learning the basics of the language, vocabulary. Even entering the community college, I didn't know the power of a sentence. I couldn't use a comma. Whereas poetry, I can use the 14 punctuation marks in any way I want. I can use the space on the page. I can speak in enjambment, in fragments, and it is okay because that is how I want to communicate. So that's why I started writing. I just needed a way to live. Some people find their professions and say they live to work, but for me, it's almost the opposite. I write to live. We were in the midst of COVID. My undergrad classes had moved online. One of the capstone classes I needed to graduate wasn't going to be offered in the quarter I needed. So my advisor was like, hey, why don't you do an independent study? I was starting to explore my identity post-military of what it really means to be both Mexican and American. I wanted to know why my parents came. I wanted to do this in poetic verse. Before we were really focusing on the written word in literature, we had bards going from city to city, using verse and lyric, the classical rhyme schemes, these words that are memorable to communicate what was going on, to tell legends and stories. Using verse and lyric was intended to communicate that. This has never changed. You look at the Romantics and Wordsworth, which is one of my big inspirations for the book. And what Wordsworth said was he wanted to write for the common man in the common tongue, the workers in the factories that were springing up around London. He wanted to go and tell their story and write in a way that was meaningful to them. I ripped that off 100%. I didn't come up with this by myself. I read that and I was like, who is that today? That is my parents. That is my community. My parents went from working in an orchard to working in a potato factory. You know, the people I grew up with worked in ag and as mechanics and truck drivers. Their voice is powerful. My mom's stories are powerful, but how do we communicate that? And it's poetry. What can I do, right? I wanted to be an immigration attorney, but life gave me this to be able to do that work. Poetry is an act of revolution. Writing is an act of revolution. You cannot take away a written word. You can try, you can burn it, you can hide it, but the power in the message resonates. Writing is the way to change. When I work with youth, one of the things that I can do as a poet is remind them that their value is not only in the strength of their body. Not that I'm gonna knock anybody who wants to work in a field as a mechanic. Shoot, I've done that work, and when I wanna quit writing, when the writing gets too hard, when I was in the middle of writing my book and it was the late nights that I would sit and cry thinking that, why am I doing this? Why would anybody read it? I wanted to go back home and drive a combine. Take me back to the field because that is easy. Let me work in a factory where I don't have to think, where I can lift a box and place it on a pallet as it moves down the line, wrap it in shrink wrap and send it on the forklift. I can drive a forklift and I can do that for 12 hours and not have to worry and not have to think. And that is okay. And my parents gave me a great life doing this type of work. But we are also more than just laborers. Writing can remind and strengthen us of that. I can sit in a space with youth and say, I can make a living with my mind, with the words that are there, with the stories that we live. Nothing else has the power of the written word. This poem is entitled Mi carcachita azul y el perro negro. Dormía en el asiento trasero hasta que el sol brillaba alto, o me sentaba en el asiento del conductor y tumbaba el volante. A veces me escubía para tumbarle en el capo del topaz azul del 1982. El niñero, ese perro negro que jugaba por horas, no dejaba de traernos la pelota. Nos reíamos corriendo por las hileras. Siempre esperaba el descansito de mis padres, la cara de mi mamá brillando con el sombrero del sol, cerezas frescas en el mano, burritos en aluminio, aún calientitos en el termo verde, nuestro almuerzo. La cajuela del carro se convertía en nuestra mesa, en nuestro propio día de llevar a los hijos al trabajo. Mi carcachita azul y el perro negro, roughly translated to my POS, blue car and the black dog. I slept in the back seat until the sun shone high, or I'd sit in the driver's seat and take the wheel. Sometimes I'd wiggle out and lie on the hood of the dusty 1982 blue Topaz. Our sitter, that black dog who'd play for hours. He just kept bringing us back the ball, and we just laughed and ran through the rows. I always waited for the time my parents would break, my mom's face shining under the bandana and a sun hat, fresh cherries in her hand, foil burritos still warm in the dented green thermos, our lunch. The trunk of the car became our table on our own bring your kids to work day. I was reading this poem to a group of middle schoolers in Eastern Washington, and one of the students wrote a note to me, a thank you letter. He starts off in English. We were talking about sneakers. I'm a big sneakerhead, and I had a fresh haircut. My hair was short, and my fade was tight. And he's talking about like, man, if I ever go to Seattle, I want you to hook me up with your barber. And then there's a switch that happens. Call it a code switch, call it a change of his own identity. But he goes from writing in English, talking about our cultural and just similarities in style and flavor, to he writes in Spanish and he says, I've never seen myself in a poem before. I work in the fields with my parents, or I go to the fields with my parents in the summers too. It's really cool to see that. if no one else ever reads one of my poems again, if no one ever publishes anything, if that is the whole point of why I spent years working on that collection and the training that it took to be able to write at that level, that's it. That's why. For that young man to see himself in literature, for that young man to know his story is important and valuable. Everything else is just icing. I was sleeping in unbearable pain when the curandera came. She took me in. No one could take me to be cured. The white fluorescent lights of the hospital would shine on our brown skin and empty pockets. When we arrived at the orchard, they gave us a meeting explaining something about the chemicals, that when applied, we must wait 72 hours for re-entry. We didn't, stepping the next day on the mayordomo's orders. I was the only one harmed of the 20. My wife was still in Mexico, at home with our child. I had made up my mind I wasn't going to live. I was 2 days intoxicated. I was poisoned. I was wishing I was dead. So my friend's dad had come to Washington to work in the apple orchards. He had been in the country for less than a year, and the procedure was when pesticides are applied to the tree, you wait 72 hours before entering. His boss had told them to enter early, where he was poisoned. A curandera is a healer. Being undocumented, my friend's dad didn't have papers. He was afraid to go seek medical treatment. 2, he didn't have the money. He was here working, sending his finances back home to support his family. The other man called in a healer to try to do something, but he was taken to the hospital. But before that happened, he was ill for 2 days, almost at the point of death, wishing he would pass. This is not the only time I've heard of experiences like this. It's hard when the politics and realities of life come face to face with humanity. Who funds healthcare? How do we pay for it? Who is deserving? Are questions that are asked regularly. I challenge that. Is not every human deserving? Is not every life valuable? Does a person working, regardless of documentation status, not deserve to live? Should fear really be the guiding factor besides wanting to be taken care of? The poem isn't here to say how we should fix the system, but just to remind the reader, myself, that we are humans, that we're more than just a label, that there is a name, a person, a family behind every story. Poetry has its power, and those that listen and enjoy can learn.